30 minutes to walk you through 3 different research projects that we've done recently in CoffeeMind, Copenhagen University, and SCAE. So I think I'll just get started real quickly. The 3 research projects is sensory analysis of coffee brewed on different water, and we've already talked about that today a couple of times. We've got some results on that. Another project that I did on roasting defects that I also presented last week at Nordic Roaster, but you'll just get the really brief version. And then finally, my cappuccino foam analysis was published 2 months ago in International Dairy Journal, so that was a big thing, my first publication as a first author. And we've got some amazing results, and I'll just quickly walk you through them. So, quickly, CoffeeMind is Ida, sensory scientist, me, founder, external lecturer, all the things that he just mentioned. And then I'm pretty involved with SCAE's roasting education, the certification system. I did it, and we are doing next improvement round on that at the moment. So a lot of the research is tied into improving the certification system to get some evidence to test people, because you cannot test people on rumors. You have to test people on facts. So that's what the roasting defects project is all about. And then Torben is our green coffee specialist. He's a plant biologist, did a PhD in microbiology and his postdoc in coffee processing. So he's been working in Kenya and Brazil on different types of natural, pulp natural and washed controlled fermentation, and Ida and I, we did the sensory analysis of these processing. So we met at the university actually, and at the moment we are doing even more together. So this is CoffeeMind. Education, consultancy, and research is the main thing that we do. So let's say we've got 3 samples of something that needs to be evaluated, because what we work with is different things we can play around with, but particularly we work with sensory science. And sensory science is a particular discipline, scientific discipline, and I want to just quickly explain you what it is. So let's say we've got 3 different samples. This could be different 3 different samples of the same coffee brewed on 3 different types of water, or it could be different roasting profiles. So the question is, if you taste it, how can you evaluate it and make a non-random, non-biased decision on which water is best or which roast profile is it that you want to go with? Because the problem is, if you just taste it, and you can see that in other presentations I've done, if you taste this first and then taste this, then there's something called carryover effect. And also, if you know what it is, there's cognitive bias. So there's a lot of different errors. And in research design, there are 2 things that you do everything that you can to avoid, and that's bias and random decisions. So how can you make a non-random decision? Well, first of all, you have to make it in triplicates to see if people are able to, make the same decision every time they are presented with the same sample. But it doesn't work, to just taste it in this sequence. It needs to be randomized so that all the different samples are not tasted in a particular sequence. And another thing is, the cognitive bias thing is that you are not allowed to know which, ground sample does this replicate come from. So there's a 3-digit random number allocated to each sample. And then you've got 10 assessors in a laboratory analysis. And these assessors need to go through the samples in their own unique sequence in order not to have a carryover effect. If everybody just went the sequence in the same way, then the carryover effect would be the same for all of them. So it needs to be a unique sequence as well. And they need to then, in a laboratory setup, to assess 10 to 20 different descriptors per sample on a 15 centimeter scale. That's how it works in sensory science. So what you can get from this is a result like we got on when we tested. We actually tested tap water and reverse osmosis, and also different types of ion exchange filters. Brewed the same 3 different coffees on all the different waters, but we just took the tap water and the reverse osmosis. And you can see here that the coffees taste consistently different as a function of different waters. And what you see here is p-values. These are the probability of the difference you see being a coincidence. And that's what you want to see in statistics. You want to see a value lower than 0.05. If there's a lower probability of this difference being a coincidence, then you accept it as scientific significant, and then you've established that there is a difference. So you can see here how the reverse osmosis adds fruitiness and acidity to most of the samples. I'm not going too much into the results here, but you can see that there is a difference. So it makes a difference if you evaluate when you do your cupping. It makes a difference how your coffee will appear when you cup it. So I would say the water quality is part of your cupping protocol, and well, I don't know if you should, but at least you could, have different waters, and every time you make a decision, you make sure to brew all samples on different waters to see, how will this taste on Iceland as opposed to Denmark or China or whatever, by knowing something about the water. So, and there's another spin-off thing, because once people are presented with the same triplicate or replicate several times, scoring the same parameters, other than getting data on the samples, you can also get data on the individual assessor in the panel and see how well they were at always making the same decision when they were presented with the same replicate on the same parameter. And you can see here, every dot here is a score on the 15 centimeter scale that they use to evaluate the samples. So here you can see this assessor, he or she is pretty good at always, making the same decision when they are presented with the same sample with regards to the same sensory parameter. And then you can see the dotted line here is the panel average, which is considered the best estimate of the real taste of the sample. And you can see some people are not very good at this, and Ida, my colleague Ida, she can make a full report of people's skills in this. So that's something we've done called sensory performance, where people actually can get a very, very, very precise picture of their sensory skills. And we've done this with beginners, and we've done it with really skilled people, and the benefit is, I would say, equal on both of them. So this was just to tell you something about sensory methodology and the potential you can, or the potential benefit being, if you evaluate the samples, but also individual skills of the individual couples. So what we did a research project also on roasting defects, and I announced this 2 years ago at World Roaster Summit, and we had to make up, a kind of framework of parameters that we want to put into the research. And I just made up this, kind of gross amount of parameter, and I wanted to, describe the roast profiles in terms of these parameters, because the idea is that, you've got, just like the golden cup standard, you've got a range where you expect it to be nice, and then you've got some extremes that you don't expect to be nice. Science is not a very subtle methodology, unfortunately. So I felt we had to kind of start from the defect extremes in order to kind of point in the direction of a sweet spot when it comes to roasting. So the idea is that you've got some extremes, some extremely dark roast, some extremely light, baked, scorched, and underdeveloped. So I tried to make sense of a kind of parameter space that was clearly a defect space, and then if it was not a defect, then it must be in an area where you could call it a sweet spot, or something that could be called a specialty level. So when you look at when you feed parameters into a research project like this, you have to be aware that if you work strictly scientifically, then the parameters or the descriptors that you use in the sensory setup needs to be really, really specific descriptors. So we wanted to see if it made sense to talk about clean cup when it came to coffee roasting, just as it makes sense for some people to talk about clean cup when it comes to green coffee. But we are also aware that this is a very abstract, sensory parameter. So it's very, very difficult to calibrate a panel to understand the same with something as complex or abstract as clean cup. So here you can see acidic, sweet, bitter, tobacco, licorice, roasted rye bread, hazelnut, peach is very specific descriptors. And for these very specific descriptors, you can actually have specific references that you can calibrate your panel up against. It becomes more and more difficult to calibrate a panel the more abstract the descriptor that you use is. And for example, the SCAE standard is where you have got something like clean cup. What does it mean? It probably means something for a particular group of people, but it's very difficult to work with sensorically. So we wanted in this project, when it came to roasting defect, we wanted to introduce something that was not as abstract, but a bit more abstract than really specific references. So we chose complexity, harmonic, and balanced as something we hoped would be, clear enough for the panel to agree about. So, and this also comes in to, this is a real scientific methodology. But notice here there's no hedonic parameters, as it's called. There's nothing about which one is best, because which one is best, as Patrick also mentioned, doesn't make sense outside a specific group of people that it makes sense in relation to. So feeding these different sensory panel parameters and then into the project, and then also feeding these different roast defects into the research project is kind of the basis of the results. So here you can see I made a reference curve. A reference curve was just, I had to, this is probably not the perfect curve, but I just wanted to make something, a profile that made sense at the same level as, the 25-second rule of espresso brewing. That also correlates a bit to golden cup. Something that most roasters would probably, agree that this is definitely better than the same profile roasted to Acton 45. And whether this is a defect or not, I don't know. Some roasters roast this light, but this might make sense, especially in the light of the consumer panel that we were also planning to expose these coffees to. So, and I tried to make some sense of different types of defects in terms of the roast parameters that I showed you before. So I thought, a baked one, I defined it to be a roast profile that looked like the reference roast profile up until first crack. After first crack, I wanted the color to be the same as the reference, but the development time much longer. As you can see, the time to first crack is the same, 9 minutes. Development time is 6 minutes rather than 3 minutes. The underdeveloped is the opposite, so you've got very long time to first crack, and then you've got only 3 minutes development time. And then the scorched one, you just got, a very short time to first crack and very short development time. So I tried to make, a parameter space where it was easy to tell people, what did I do and how did I interpret a scorched, baked, and underdeveloped. So these roasts were done. And these are the results when it came to the laboratory panel. Exactly what I showed you. We had 10 people from the professional panel at Food Science. They've got a cohort of people that they've screened them to be very skilled, and then they recruit them or pay them to do these data every time we have a project. And in the sensory laboratory work, we added only complexity as a kind of what I would call meta descriptor, not a very specific descriptor than the others. And as you see, the normal, this is a PCA plot, and it just gives you an idea of what correlates when it comes to the independent parameter. That's the, this is the cause. The independent parameter in a research setup is the cause, and then the effect is what you measure when you taste it. So here you can see what correlates when it comes to cause and effect, and it seems like the normal, the reference roast profile came out with a higher score for complexity, and you can also see that some other positive descriptors like dark berries and acidity correlates with the normal. So we also exposed this to a consumer panel. A consumer panel, we dared to put all three meta descriptors like pleasant, harmonic, and balanced. And as you can see, it also seems like these correlate, so that the normal roast profile or the reference profile came out most pleasant, balanced, and harmonic. It seems like it makes sense to talk about a sweet spot when it comes to these roasting defects. And as you can see, this is the hedonic. In a consumer study, you are allowed to ask which one do you prefer, or from a scale from 0 to 10, how would you score this? But this only makes sense in the light of this specific population answering this question. And that's probably one of the problems with the golden cup standard, that that you've got a technical definition of a parameter space with no population reference. Who prefers this? And that's why you can brew completely different, and if people like it, who is to say what is wrong or right? So I think it's very important that when we start to develop these standards, we are very aware that there's a big difference between a laboratory profiling where you're not allowed to use hedonic parameters versus consumer projects where you get hedonic parameters and you get a result, but it's not something you can extrapolate that this is the right reference point. It's right in terms of the specific people. And then the next question is, looking at the kind of people that went into the study, then you can try and see, okay, if we find similar people, it might, you might be able to extrapolate it. But, for the project, it was just, a very early attempt to even see if we could make sense of roasting defects. Would it make sense at all in terms of the data? And I would say it seems like it made sense. That the normal one was the most, as you saw, turned out best with the three positive meta descriptors. But also, if they were asked, how much did you like it, the normal also came out as the most preferred for this population. So yeah, that's the two sensory projects. So I'm on a very tight schedule, so I'll just go directly to the next, and this is the Cappuccino foam research project that we started in 2009. It's completely different. I've been already in 2003. I was told that nobody knows anything about milk in coffee, and then I contacted Richard Ibsen, the professor at Dairy Technology in Copenhagen, and then we started already. Or was it 2004? I think it was, yeah, 2004. And this is a project that we got funding for in 2009, and the result is, I just wanted to know, how can we talk about quality in cappuccino foam? How can we do this scientifically? Foam is so difficult to work with in the lab because, sometimes if you do rheology or some other stuff where you look at consistency, you scoop at some point, but the point where you scoop, is that relevant to what people taste in the cup at a cafe? So foam, because it's such a not stable phenomena, you have to there's a very explicit timeline on the quality aspect of it. So because when do you measure the quality? So I really wanted to look into the foam. So I developed this wooden box, as you can see, with a light source in one end and then a camera in the other end. And then I could pour the foam into this glass vessel, and then the transmitted light was recorded by the camera. And as you can see, then the camera would be able to see the pouring of the foam. And then we took a 10-minute video. And every second during this video, we took one frame, and then we made an average of this frame and collapsed it into one column. And then we built up a picture. So every column here represents the state of the foam at that particular second where the frame was taken out of the video. So when you saw how the bubbles, you've seen a cappuccino or a cafe latte or whatever from the side, you can see the bubble go up. So the first thing you see is the bubbles, they'll go up, and when the last bubble reaches the foam, then you've got the maximum foam volume. And you can see here, this part of the picture represents the bubbles going up, and here you can see the last bubble hit the bottom of the foam. And the weird thing is, from now on, the foam actually becomes smaller again. So it seems like when you see the full picture, these are the first 1.5 minutes. And after 1.5 minutes, when the last drop bubble reaches the foam, then the foam starts to become smaller. And it starts to become smaller because here the foam is very moist or wet. There's a big distance between the bubbles because there's still milk between them. But gravity pulls the liquid, so the bubble starts to, or the foam starts to drain. And when the foam starts to drain, the water goes down to the liquid phase, and that pushes up the foam. So the foam becomes smaller and smaller. So you can see this represents what happens in, you know, a latte or a cappuccino over time. So first the foam is created in the cup actually, if it's done properly, and then the foam becomes drier and drier over time. So this measurement method is able to assess the state of the foam every second for 10 minutes. So what do we see? We saw these features. You can see this is a power function we found out. So this is the upper power. That says something about the foam lost, right? The lower power says something about the drainage speed. The upper linear, this is the upper linear. You can see there's a feature here. And the lower linear says something about the speed with which the bubble goes up in the liquid. And then we found some sigmoidal trend in here. And then we also have the specific foam height for this foam. In this, the green part of it. And the triple point is the time it takes for the last bubble to reach the foam. So the bigger the bubble, the quicker this will happen. The slower slower it happens, it means that the bubbles travel slower in the liquid. And then the bubble must have been smaller. So here you can actually indirectly compete, baristas can compete on bubble size, because it's just to measure which barista was able to make a foam with the most delayed triple point. But you could also, you know, make a barista foam, the same foam 5 times in a row, and then you could calculate what's the variance between this barista's skills and always getting the same foam. So I hope this measurement method will, you know, be standard equipment in future training centers, because now you've got an alternative to the teaspoon evaluation. You can actually see some really measurable things, such important things as consistency in foam volume, but also bubble size. And this can of course also be used by dairies and fully automatic machine manufacturers, or also manual. You know, what's the difference between different pressures, different angles, different hole size, and stuff like that. I developed this measurement method in order to test what is the relationship between protein content of the milk and the foam quality. And to make a long story short, I can tell you that we tested 15 different combinations of milk and protein. So you can see 5 different fat levels, 3 different proteins levels, and that gives you a full factor design of 15 different combinations. And then we could see that, you know, we made the protein vary from 3 to 3.8 because that's the natural variation of protein in Danish milk. In milk, the fat content is standardized, which means that every day, you know, they actually make sure that it's exactly what it says on the bottle. But the protein is just, you know, changing with the seasonal variation. So we wanted to know if there's a consistent, you know, difference in foam quality depending on the range where the proteins vary just naturally. And we saw, you know, this is another PCA plot, and here you can see a trend that it makes a difference. We added all the features that I showed you before, all the trends in the picture. We added them into the statistical analysis, and the question is the statistics able to make groups that has got a linear trend from low to high? And it seems like it does. Of course, fat makes a difference. That's trivial. But whether the protein also makes a difference, that was the big question. And we found that even, you know, small differences from 3.4 to 3.8 made a consistent difference in the foam quality. And we could also see that the triple point was delayed. I did 3 different replicates of all the 15 milks. So this is the individual replicates, and you can see consistently that the triple point is delayed when the protein content is higher. So that was the main hypothesis we wanted to test, and we were lucky enough that the measurement method is actually able to document that this is true. So this is a big you know, use value for the research. We could also see that systematically, you know, do you know that if there's a relationship between the fat content and the foam amount? This is something that people, you know, have been talking about for years, but we proved that yes, this is true. The higher the fat content, the lower the foam amount, because we can measure the exact foam amount, and with the standard steaming procedure there was no variance, and we could also see here that the statistics couldn't see any difference between the three replicates, which means that the standard steaming procedure is really good because there's no different. Every time you steam a milk, you get a consistent result. But you can also see systematically that the higher the fat content, the lower the foam amount. And you can also see the higher the protein content, the higher the foam amount. Now, this is not a statistically significant result, but the PCA plot that I showed you earlier shows the same trend. So it seems like it's a trend that the higher the protein content, the higher the foam amount as well. And that makes sense because protein is what stabilizes the bubbles to create a foam in the first place. So the next question is, you know, so okay, I've said this for years, so I'm really happy that my data also supports it, you know, that fat creates less foam but stabilizes the foam that was created. So you get less but more stable foam with higher fat. Because in this plot you can see the foam lost. The foam lost, that's the upper power curve, and the drainage is the lower power curve. So if you look at the upper power curve, you can see that the foam lost is lower for a high fat milk. So did you get the point that with higher fat you get less foam, but the foam created is more stable than lower? So that's a kind of a paradox. But the data showed that. I'm done? Yeah, but I'm done. But this is the conclusion. So yeah, the first conclusion is there's a huge sensory difference between different water used. It's not just a small thing that experts can taste. We've done this with the customers in Denmark, you know, and everybody unskilled can really taste this difference. And that also showed in our data that we got some amazing p-values, and that shows that that's a huge difference. But also that it makes sense to talk about a parameter sweet spot for coffee roasting. I'm not saying, and Patrick would also hate me for saying that there's a perfect roast. There's no perfect roast. But at least you can make, you know, a parameter rate where you don't have defects. And that's a start, at least for a certification system that needs to test people on, you know, defects. Yeah, milk with a higher protein content makes better foam. Milk with high fat content creates slightly less, but slow drainage foam. I didn't want to make it a more complicated conclusion than this, because, you know, talking about 3 research projects in half an hour is not possible. So I just wanted to give you a really brief overview of 3 different research projects that we've done in SCAE the last couple of years, so that you got a sense of what is going on. And I hope that you feel that all 3 are relevant, because all baristas, they talk about, you know, what's roasting and what's, you know, so I hope that this project, you know, can add some content that can at least, you know, bring the certification system further to be more evidence-based, but also, you know, provide something for the community to get some more, you know, data on what's actually going on when you play around with mass data. And the milk foam project, you know, that's pretty spot on for this audience, isn't it? And I don't know if you could follow everything I said, but I hope that you agree that it was ridiculous how much information we could drag out of, you know, just watching a foam from the side with a camera. But that's because, you know, the people at the University in Copenhagen, they are extremely skilled with something called multivariate statistics. So you can just throw huge databases at them, and then they'll tell you exactly what correlates and how much, and they can really do big data mining. And that was needed for my Cappuccino foam project, because just fiddling around with a spreadsheet with all the data wouldn't have, you know, got all these results. All right, so that was it.
Definitely finish this time.
What's that time?
Yeah, no, you're good. You did well. But why didn't you do 3 presentations instead? Yeah, oh, she's terrible. Yeah, she does that. Fantastic presentation. One question I've got before I throw it out there is, do you ever see like a latte art competition where you actually put it in the box and just measure it and do it purely on statistics? I know it's not going to be very fun to watch.
Yeah, but this could provide a more quantitative approach to barista training. And for what it's worth, of course you cannot just base a latte art competition on that. But I think it's great to have an alternative to just the teaspoon method. And if you look at the barista training material the SCAE has done, there are pictures, and I think that's fine. That's a great place to start. This foam, where does that sit in the sequence of pictures? In terms of quality, that's a great place to start. But I think this is another level of insight into the foam, and because the certification system, to be good, it needs to be fair. And to be fair, it needs to be precise. So all these things that we can do to support the way things are tested, I think has got a lot of value to the community, but also the certification system, certainly.
Fantastic. I'm sure there's questions out there who'd like to start. Mark, it's going to be a short question one because you went too long.
I did.
Thanks very much. Have you ever tested, put espresso in the glass vessel first and poured the foam on top to see?
It's too complex.
You can't do it?
You could do it, but you have to start with the simplest possible system, and that was without coffee. But of course, this is just the first attempt. I just decided, that would be another source of variance. So I didn't do that, and once we have these results, we can go on to the next tests. And that would be adding coffee and adding different coffee, adding different roast degrees and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think a silly kind of pocket science thing was like a coffee with a higher acidity will create bubbles on the top of a cappuccino quicker. It's like one of those things. I'm like, that could probably answer that question
exactly
a bit more thoroughly.
And then you could also see what happens in deep in the foam when you vary the roast degree or the pH.
I just wanted to know, did you taste it? Was there different levels of taste?
If I tasted it? No. That was the surveillance camera. No, that's another thing I want to do, to have a sensory correlation, because at the moment it's purely technical. And I've also nailed what kind of research design, but this kind of research is really expensive and time consuming, so we haven't done it yet, but that's the next thing we want to do as well. There's a lot of next things I want to do, but this is one of them.
That's the thing with research, it just leads to a new place, to another place, to another place.
Time
for one last question, and then we're going to have to wrap up. I'm going to go to one of our speakers. Tim?
So I've measured the weight before and after steaming, and some machines will give you a lot more water in the milk than others, based on how much water, I guess, you have in the steam tank. Have you experimented with the different sort of wetness of the steam and the quality of the foam?
No, but that would be a perfect thing to test, because one thing is the weight after the foam, but the next more interesting question is, how does that affect the overall dynamics, such as draining speed, bubble size, and stuff like that. So that would be really interesting. But no, we haven't done any of that yet.
I'm sure you'll join me in putting your hands together one more time for Mr. Morten Munchow.